Okay, hi, I'm Joed Tirol, Jose Tirol, if you want. I have a PhD, I'm assistant professor in the Department of History. I've been teaching for the last 20 years. Yeah. Martial law was a 14-year period in history. What happened? It's where one man, one Philippine president, took power for himself, aided by his family, his cronies, and with assistance of the military and the police, was able to dominate Philippine politics, Philippine economics, and dominate the very lives of the ordinary Filipino people, such that he or she lost all freedom to speak, to express themselves, or to simply be what they could be. What needs to be understood about martial law is it's a lot more complex. It's not simply about stealing, it's not simply about plunder, it's not simply about human rights, but it's all of that. And the consequences on the nation, not just now, but on the consequences what we still feel today, 31 years after EDSA. The good news is we have set up a constitution that makes it theoretically harder to declare martial law. We have set a constitution that protects human rights. But as you can see very clearly, we haven't quite learned what martial law can do. Because what Ferdinand Marcos did 31 years ago was to take away basic human rights, take away basic expression, basic organization, basic belief in oneself. We need to study martial law even more because the risks of a repeat to martial law, in my opinion as a historian, are very strong because we do not appreciate what went wrong then. And therefore, there's a great risk of seeing what might go wrong again. We are taught as history professors to be neutral, the word is fair. Okay, neutrality is actually impossible in teaching history. It's true. What needs to be done, one of the famous lines, history, you teach history, you have to show both sides. I've told students for almost 20 years, it's not both sides. There are multiple sides. There are infinite sides. Every person who ever went through martial law has a different side. Martial law, obviously, some people who benefited, some people who did not. And there's some people who benefited from it even today, some people who are suffering from it even today. If you want to talk about fair, yes, let us talk about the new structures of martial law. Let us talk about the war against the communist insurgency, fine. Let's talk about the war against the Muslim insurgency, fine. But let's also talk about the cost of that insurgency and also what caused those insurgencies and what made those insurgencies become worse over time. A lot of buildings were set up. In fact, some textbooks I know, public school textbooks, they're very good in listing down all the infrastructure. And then they will say, dahil ito yung ginawa, kumpara mo sa mga namatay. Actually, pros and cons. Parang accounting is like debit, credit. It's almost like saying, the credit side looks better than the debit side. Therefore, martial law was okay. It's not like that. The fact of the teacher, the job of the teacher is to get as much of the truth as possible. The teacher is supposed to make you critically think about it, to make you critically process what is going on. So in that sense, the teacher has to show how complex it really was, and based on the complexity, then you make a proper judgment about it. We are not talking about numbers only. You cannot teach history or any other subject for that matter unless you understand the lives. This is why we go back to narrative. If you don't teach it properly, we lose the narrative. And if we don't know the narrative, then how can we talk about the narrative now? The narrative now is a product of the narrative then. If we don't know the then, we can't talk about the now. And if we can't talk about the now properly, how can we talk about the what happens next? It is your responsibility as a teacher to tell the story properly. If you don't, somebody else will. And that other version might be tragically incorrect. So if you think about it very carefully, many of the victims of martial law, they're dying out. Can you imagine people dying out without really seeing the dawn? So when the teacher specifically looks at this period in time very, very deeply, he is showing that the student right there, this is important. Why? It's about honesty, it's about credibility, it's about faith, it's about justice, it's about ourselves. History is not his story, her story, our story. Hold on to it and never let it go. To my fellow teachers, This is your chance to be real teachers. Do not just teach memorizing, teach memory. Because only in teaching memory can we really understand what happened to us and what is still happening to us and what we can do if we properly remember.